The night sky growled as a ferocious thunderstorm rolled over the dense, ancient forest of the Pacific Northwest. Sheets of rain lashed against towering evergreens, their branches groaning under the weight of the wind. Jack Harper, a retired search and rescue worker, trudged carefully along a narrow trail near his remote cabin, his flashlight struggling to pierce the relentless downpour. Jack had spent much of his life navigating these rugged terrains, but even now, the wilderness never ceased to humble him. He was out tonight to check on flood-prone areas around the property, ensuring fallen trees hadn't blocked streams and caused dangerous water buildups. His aging but sturdy Labrador, Max, had opted to stay behind, curled up near the warmth of the cabin's fireplace. As Jack adjusted his rain jacket, he heard something soft, almost imperceptible over the storm's fury. A faint whimper echoed from deeper within the forest. He paused, his instincts kicking in. Was it an animal in distress? A coyote pup? Maybe? Jack followed the sound, stepping cautiously over roots and underbrush until he reached a small clearing. There, nestled between two rocks and shivering uncontrollably, was a tiny creature soaked to the bone. Its matted fur glistened in the flashlight's beam, and its wide, fearful eyes locked onto Jack's. "Hey there!" "Easy now," Jack murmured, crouching low to appear less threatening. He assumed it was a wolf pup, likely separated from its pack. Wolves were uncommon this close to human settlements, but not unheard of. The pup didn't growl or try to run. It simply trembled, too weak or cold to resist. Jack took off his jacket, gently wrapping the creature inside. He felt its small frame shiver against him. "Let's get you warmed up," he whispered. With steady, deliberate steps, he made his way back to the cabin. By the time they reached the warmth of the cabin, Jack's mind was racing. Wolves were highly social creatures. It was unusual to find a young one alone. Had its pack been driven away? Perhaps poachers were involved. He shook off the thought, focusing instead on the task at hand. Jack set the pup on a soft blanket near the fireplace. He carefully dried the creature with a towel, noting its features. Its fur, though dark like a wolf's, shimmered oddly in the firelight. Its paws seemed a little too delicate, its limbs unusually long for a pup this age. Despite these peculiarities, Jack pushed aside his curiosity. The animal needed help, not scrutiny. "Let's get you something to eat," Jack said, opening a can of dog food. He set a small dish down, but the pup barely sniffed it before turning away. Jack frowned. Wolves didn't usually turn down food, especially after being caught in such a harsh storm. Maybe it was too scared or unwell. "All right, no pressure," he muttered, sitting beside the pup. He stroked its back gently, feeling the tension slowly melt away under his hand. The creature leaned into the warmth of the fire, its eyelids growing heavy. Jack sat quietly for a while, listening to the calming crackle of the flames and the soft patter of rain outside. "Storm," he whispered after a time, testing the name aloud. "That's what I'll call you. You showed up in the middle of all this madness, after all." The pup's ears twitched slightly at the sound of its new name but didn't open its eyes. Over the next few weeks, Jack and Storm grew closer. Storm recovered quickly, his sleek fur regaining its luster. He began exploring the cabin and the surrounding property, though he rarely strayed far from Jack's side. Jack found himself captivated by the creature's intelligence and unusual behavior. Storm wasn't like any animal Jack had ever encountered. He didn't howl, which Jack found odd for a wolf, and he had peculiar habits, like hiding food in seemingly random spots around the property. Jack once found a stash of berries, fish bones, and leaves tucked under a loose floorboard. Even more curious, Storm seemed to avoid eating when Jack was present, as if he preferred privacy during meals. Storm's movements were mesmerizing, silent and graceful, almost ethereal. His large, expressive eyes often held an intensity that made Jack feel as though the creature understood more than he let on. Sometimes, Jack caught himself wondering if Storm was something different. The old stories he'd heard from local indigenous communities flitted through his mind, legends of shapeshifters and mystical guardians of the forest. But those were just tales, weren't they? Jack tried not to dwell on the mystery. Whatever Storm was, he was part of Jack's life now. They found comfort in each other's presence, both carrying wounds from the past. Jack from a career that had taken a toll on his body and spirit, and Storm from whatever ordeal had left him abandoned in the woods. Yet, as peaceful as things seemed, the outside world was beginning to take notice. Rumors of strange sightings spread throughout nearby towns. Hikers reported glimpses of a shadowy, fox-like creature with glowing eyes darting through the trees. Wildlife authorities began conducting surveys, concerned about a possible endangered species inhabiting the area. Jack knew it was only a matter of time before someone came knocking on his door. And when they did, he would have to face difficult choices about Storm's future. For now, he could only hope that their bond would be enough to weather the storm that was brewing on the horizon. Days passed, and Jack noticed more of Storm's unusual behaviors. The creature would often sit by the window at night, gazing silently at the moon and the trees swaying in the wind. His eyes glinted with a strange luminescence in the darkness, making Jack shiver despite the warmth of the fire. There was an uncanny sense of awareness in those eyes, almost as if Storm were contemplating something beyond Jack's understanding. Jack tried to shake off these thoughts. He reminded himself that he wasn't a biologist, just an old search and rescue worker with an overactive imagination. Still, he couldn't ignore what he was seeing. When he'd spoken to a local vet over the phone, the professional had sounded skeptical about Jack's claim that he had found a lone wolf pup. Wolves are rarely on their own at that age, the vet had said. You might want to consider that it could be something else. Maybe a fox or a hybrid. Jack wasn't sure about that. Storm was far too large to be any ordinary fox, and the creature's elegant, shadowy appearance didn't match anything he'd encountered before. His instincts whispered that this was something rare, perhaps even unique. One evening, Jack decided to do some research. He pulled out a few old books he'd collected over the years, many of which contained folklore from the region. One particular story caught his attention. It spoke of a shadow fox, a mythical guardian of the forest said to appear during storms to protect the natural world from human harm. These creatures were revered by some indigenous tribes and feared by others who believed their presence was an omen of upheaval. Jack chuckled to himself. Next, I'll be believing in Bigfoot, he muttered, shutting the book. But as he glanced at Storm, who was curled up on the hearth, the idea didn't seem so far-fetched anymore. Word of Storm's existence continued to spread. Jack had no idea how people found out, but rumors were difficult to control in a small community. Some claimed they'd seen a massive, fox-like creature racing through the woods. Others swore they'd heard whispers of glowing eyes in the darkness, watching them from the trees. The stories varied wildly, but all of them pointed to the same conclusion. Something strange was out there. A wildlife officer named Dana Connolly showed up at Jack's cabin one morning. She was young and sharp-eyed, her uniform still crisp from working mostly in office-based roles. Jack recognized her as someone who had grown up in the area but left for a while before returning to take a position with the local environmental department. "Mr. Harper," she greeted, removing her hat and shaking out rain from her short hair. "Mind if I have a word?" "Depends," Jack said, leaning on the doorframe. "Is this an official visit or a friendly one?" "Bit of both," Dana replied with a small smile. "I've been hearing reports about an unusual animal in these parts. Folks are saying it might be an endangered species." Jack's stomach tightened. He kept his face neutral. "Lots of people see things out in the woods after a few drinks. You know how it is." Dana chuckled softly but didn't look convinced. "True enough. Still, I'm under pressure to follow up. We don't want to interfere with anyone's property, but if there's an endangered animal in the area, it could complicate things." "Are you sure you haven't seen anything unusual?" Jack hesitated, then shook his head. "Just the usual deer and coyotes. Nothing special." Dana studied him for a moment longer, then nodded. "All right, but if you do see anything, give us a call. We want to protect the wildlife, not harm it." "Of course," Jack said, managing a smile. "I'll let you know." He watched as Dana walked back to her truck, the tires kicking up mud as she drove away. Once she was out of sight, Jack exhaled heavily. He knew this was only the beginning. People would keep coming, and the pressure would only increase. That night, Jack sat on the porch with a mug of coffee in hand. Storm lay beside him, his ears twitching as he listened to the distant sounds of the forest. The rain had stopped, leaving the air crisp and cool. Jack stroked Storm's head thoughtfully. "They're going to come looking for you," he said quietly. "And if they find out what you are, well, things won't be easy for either of us." Storm tilted his head, as if he understood. Jack sighed. He'd always been a man of action, used to solving problems through hard work and experience. But this was different. How could he protect a creature that defied explanation? The legal system wouldn't care about their bond. To them, Storm was just another wild animal, something to be studied and catalogued, or worse, confiscated. He thought about calling an old friend who worked in wildlife management, someone who might know the legal loopholes to keep Storm safe. But even that carried risks. The fewer people who knew about Storm, the better. "We'll figure it out," Jack murmured. "One step at a time." Storm nuzzled his hand in response, a quiet reassurance in the dark. Jack smiled faintly. Whatever challenges lay ahead, they would face them together. But deep down, he knew time was running out. The storm on the horizon wasn't just a metaphor. It was real, and it was coming for them both. Over the next few weeks, the pressure on Jack intensified. More people began venturing into the woods, including local wildlife authorities, amateur photographers, and thrill-seekers hoping to catch a glimpse of the so-called shadow beast. Jack kept Storm hidden as best he could, restricting his time outdoors to nighttime or remote areas far from prying eyes. But Jack knew this wasn't sustainable. If anyone found Storm, they might accuse him of harboring an illegal wild animal. Late one afternoon, Jack decided to make some calls. He reached out to Dr. Evelyn Tate, an old friend and renowned wildlife conservationist who specialized in endangered species. Evelyn was someone Jack trusted implicitly, and he hoped she might have some advice on what to do. "Jack Harper." Evelyn's voice crackled through the phone. "Been a long time. What's going on?" Jack hesitated for a moment, unsure of how much to reveal. "I've got a situation here, Ev. Found an animal in the woods. Thought it was a wolf pup at first, but now, I'm not so sure. It's different." "Different how?" Jack glanced over at Storm, who was resting by the fireplace, his sleek, dark fur gleaming in the light. "Hard to explain. He's got this presence. Smart, almost like he understands me. And people around town have started noticing. They think there's some rare animal out here, and the authorities are sniffing around." Evelyn was quiet for a moment. "You think it could be some undiscovered species?" "Maybe," Jack said, lowering his voice, "or something from local legends. Ever heard of a shadow fox?" There was a pause on the other end of the line before Evelyn spoke again. "I've heard stories, but that's folklore, Jack. You're saying you've got something like that living in your cabin?" "Yeah. And I don't know how to protect him." Evelyn sighed. "All right, listen. You need to document everything: photos, videos, behavior patterns. If this is truly something unique, you'll need evidence to get any kind of legal protection. There's a process for securing permits for exotic or endangered species, but it's not easy. You'll probably have to fight for it." Jack rubbed his temples. "Figures. Nothing's ever easy." "Nope," Evelyn agreed. "But you're not alone. I can connect you with some people who specialize in these kinds of cases. Maybe even some indigenous leaders who might have insights into the creature's origins. Just be careful. Once the government gets involved, you might lose control over what happens to him." "Yeah," Jack muttered. "That's what I'm afraid of." After the call, Jack got to work. He began documenting Storm's behavior, using an old camcorder he kept in the cabin. He filmed Storm during their hikes through the forest, capturing the creature's agility and uncanny ability to navigate difficult terrain. He recorded Storm's reactions to various stimuli, sounds, smells, and other animals, and noted his preference for hiding food in strange places. Jack also took detailed notes in a leather-bound journal, including sketches of Storm's unique features. The process was both therapeutic and frustrating. He felt like a detective piecing together a puzzle with no clear solution. One night, Jack received a visit from an unexpected guest. Paul Whitefeather, a respected elder from a nearby indigenous community, arrived at Jack's cabin. Paul was a quiet man known for his deep knowledge of local history and traditions. "Evening, Jack," Paul greeted with a nod. "Heard you've been asking questions about some old stories." Jack invited him inside, offering a cup of coffee. "Yeah, I've got something unusual living with me," Jack admitted. "Figured you might know more about it than anyone else." Paul sat by the fire, his gaze thoughtful. "There are tales of shadow guardians, beings that protect the balance of nature. They're said to appear during times of great change or danger. People fear them because they don't understand them, but they're not meant to harm. They guide and protect, though they can be elusive." Jack listened intently. "You think that's what storm is?" Paul took a long sip of his coffee before answering. "I think you were meant to find each other. The forest doesn't make mistakes. But now you've got a responsibility. If you want to protect him, you'll need the support of the community. Some will fear him, others will want to exploit him. You'll have to be the one to bridge that gap." Jack nodded slowly. "I'm willing to do whatever it takes." Paul gave him a reassuring smile. "Good. We'll stand with you. But be ready. Storms like this don't pass easily." In the days that followed, Jack began reaching out to people in town, subtly testing their reactions to the idea of a rare creature living in the forest. To his relief, many locals respected the natural world and seemed open to the idea of protecting it. However, a few were more skeptical, dismissing the rumors as nonsense. Jack also noticed that Storm was becoming restless. The creature would often pace near the cabin's boundaries, sniffing the air and listening for distant sounds. Jack wondered if Storm sensed the growing attention around them, or if something else was calling to him. One evening, as they walked through the woods together, Storm suddenly froze. His ears perked up, and his body tensed like a coiled spring. Jack followed his gaze and saw movement in the distance. A group of wild foxes emerging from the underbrush. They moved with a grace that reminded Jack of Storm, their eyes glowing faintly in the moonlight. Storm let out a low, questioning sound, almost like a whimper. For a moment, Jack thought Storm might run to join them. But after a long pause, Storm turned back to Jack, his eyes filled with an emotion Jack couldn't quite place. "You're torn, aren't you?" Jack murmured. "Part of you wants to go with them." Storm lowered his head slightly, as if acknowledging the truth in Jack's words. But he stayed by Jack's side, his loyalty stronger than whatever instinct had drawn him to the foxes. Jack knelt beside him, placing a hand on his shoulder. "We'll figure it out. Together." Storm leaned into him, and for the first time in days, Jack felt a flicker of hope. Whatever challenges lay ahead, their bond remained unbreakable. Jack knew time was running out. Rumors had turned into full-blown fascination for some townspeople. More hikers, wildlife enthusiasts, and even journalists were roaming the forest, hoping for a glimpse of the mysterious creature. Jack kept Storm out of sight, but every day brought new risks. One afternoon, Jack was startled by the sound of knocking on his cabin door. He wasn't expecting any visitors. When he opened the door, he found a man in a dark suit standing on his porch. The man introduced himself as Agent Harris from a federal wildlife protection agency. "Mr. Harper," Harris began, his tone polite but firm, "we're conducting an investigation into reports of an endangered animal in these woods. I'd like to ask you a few questions." Jack's gut tightened. He knew this wasn't just a casual visit. "What kind of questions?" Harris pulled out a small notepad. "Have you seen any unusual animals recently? Large foxes, wolves, or anything that doesn't fit local wildlife patterns?" Jack shook his head. "Nothing out of the ordinary. Just deer, raccoons, and the occasional coyote." Harris studied Jack for a moment, as if trying to read his thoughts. "These sightings have attracted a lot of attention. If there's a rare species out here, it's our job to protect it. But keeping a wild animal without proper permits is illegal, Mr. Harper. You understand that, right?" Jack met Harris's gaze steadily. I understand the law, but like I said, I haven't seen anything unusual. Harris nodded slowly. All right, just remember, if you do see something, you're required to report it. We take these matters seriously. I'll keep that in mind, Jack replied, keeping his voice neutral. As Harris turned to leave, Jack's mind raced. The noose was tightening. He couldn't afford any slip-ups. Once the door was shut, he exhaled deeply and looked over at Storm, who had been watching quietly from a shadowed corner of the cabin. We've got to be careful, Jack muttered. They're not going to stop looking. Storm blinked slowly, as if he understood the gravity of the situation. That night, Jack's fears became reality. As he and Storm walked through the forest under cover of darkness, the distant hum of voices and flashlights cut through the stillness. A group of searchers was combing the area, likely tipped off by more sightings. We need to move, Jack whispered, guiding Storm away from the approaching lights. They moved silently through the trees, Storm's agility and heightened senses guiding them through paths Jack wouldn't have found on his own. Eventually, they reached a secluded ridge overlooking the forest. The searchers' lights were far below now, like tiny fireflies blinking in the dark. Jack sat on a fallen log, catching his breath. They won't give up, not until they find something. Storm sat beside him, his ears swiveling to catch every distant sound. Jack couldn't help but marvel at the creature's resilience. Despite the constant threats, Storm had remained by his side, trusting him completely. Jack's thoughts turned to Paul Whitefeather's advice. The community needed to see Storm for what he truly was, a protector, not a threat. But how could Jack convince them without risking Storm's safety? An idea began to form in his mind, one that carried risks but might be their only chance. The following day, Jack reached out to several key people in the community. He arranged a small, discreet meeting at his cabin, inviting Paul Whitefeather, Dr. Evelyn Tate, and Dana Connolly, the wildlife officer who had visited him before. If anyone could help sway public opinion, it was them. When the group gathered, Jack explained everything. He told them about finding Storm during the thunderstorm, the creature's strange but remarkable behavior, and the growing attention from authorities. You're saying this animal might be tied to local legends? Dana asked, her brow furrowed. Paul nodded. It's possible. Stories of shadow guardians have been passed down for generations. They're rare and elusive, appearing only when the forest is in danger. If Jack's telling the truth, and I believe he is, then this isn't just any animal. Evelyn leaned forward. If that's the case, then we have to protect him. But we need proof that he's not a danger to the public. If we can document his abilities and his bond with Jack, we might be able to secure a special permit. Donna sighed. That won't be easy. The government doesn't hand out permits like that without a fight. But if we show that Storm is essential to the ecosystem, or that he's helping people, it might give us an edge. Jack glanced at Storm, who was watching the discussion quietly. He's already helped. During a hike a few weeks ago, he guided me away from a landslide area. He's got senses that could save lives in dangerous terrain. Paul nodded thoughtfully. Then maybe it's time to let others see that. If he can assist in a real rescue mission, it could shift public perception. Opportunity knocked sooner than Jack expected. A call came in from the local sheriff's office. 2 hikers had gone missing in the nearby mountains after a sudden storm. Search and rescue teams were mobilizing, but the rugged terrain made their efforts slow and difficult. Jack knew this was Storm's moment to prove himself. He contacted the sheriff and offered his assistance, emphasizing his years of experience in search and rescue work. I've also got a highly skilled tracking animal, Jack added carefully. He's unique. Trust me, he can help. The sheriff hesitated but eventually agreed. We'll take all the help we can get. Just be careful out there. Jack geared up quickly, securing a harness on Storm. As they set out with the search team, Jack felt a surge of both fear and determination. This was their chance to show the world that Storm wasn't just an animal. He was a guardian of the forest, a symbol of hope. The search stretched into the night, but Storm's keen senses led them to the missing hikers just as the temperature began to drop dangerously. The hikers, cold and exhausted but alive, were found huddled beneath a rocky overhang. News of the successful rescue spread quickly, and Storm became the talk of the town. Jack knew their journey was far from over, but for the first time he felt a glimmer of optimism. With allies by his side and Storm proving his worth to the community, they had a fighting chance. The rescue operation brought Storm into the spotlight like never before. News outlets ran stories about the mysterious, fox-like creature that had helped save 2 lives in the wilderness. Some called him a miracle. Others viewed him with suspicion, wondering what kind of animal he truly was. Jack knew it was only a matter of time before government officials demanded answers. True to form, Agent Harris returned to Jack's cabin, this time with a team of specialists. They wanted to examine Storm, claiming they needed to ensure the animal posed no threat to public safety. "You're not taking him," Jack said firmly, standing in the doorway with Storm at his side. "He's not some lab specimen. He's part of this community now. He just saved 2 lives, for God's sake." Harris crossed his arms. "We're not here to confiscate him yet, but there are laws, Mr. Harper. You don't have a permit to keep an animal like this. We can't ignore that." Jack's jaw tightened. "Then give me the chance to prove he belongs here. Let me work with the local wildlife department and the community to secure a special permit. You've seen what he can do. He's more than just a wild animal." Harris hesitated, glancing at Storm. The creature's eyes gleamed with quiet intelligence, as if he understood every word being spoken. Finally, Harris nodded. "You've got 2 weeks. Get your paperwork and evidence in order. But if you don't, we'll have no choice but to intervene." With the clock ticking, Jack sprang into action. Evelyn, Paul, and Dana all worked alongside him, gathering testimonials from the hikers Storm had rescued, local residents who had witnessed his presence, and experts who attested to the creature's significance. Paul even organized a community meeting, where he spoke about the legends of shadow guardians and how they symbolized the balance between humanity and nature. "We have a rare opportunity here," Paul said, addressing the crowd. "This creature has chosen to trust one of us. It's our responsibility to protect him, not out of fear, but out of respect." The community rallied behind Jack and Storm, signing petitions and pledging their support. Dana used her position to expedite the permitting process, arguing that Storm was not just a wild animal but a unique, domesticated part of Jack's life. The sheriff vouched for Storm's role in the recent rescue mission, emphasizing the positive impact he had already made. As the deadline approached, Jack felt the weight of hope and anxiety pressing down on him. He had done everything he could, but the final decision was out of his hands. On the last day of the 2-week period, Agent Harris returned with an official document in hand. Jack's heart pounded as Harris unfolded the paper and handed it to him. "Congratulations," Harris said with a faint smile. "You've been granted a special wildlife permit. Storm is now legally recognized as a protected companion animal under your care. But understand, there are conditions. He'll need regular check-ins from wildlife authorities, and his environment has to meet certain safety standards." Jack nodded, barely able to contain his relief. "That's fine. Whatever it takes." Storm stood beside him, his ears perked up as if sensing the significance of the moment. Jack knelt beside him, scratching behind his ears. "We did it, buddy. You're home." In the weeks that followed, Jack built a large, custom enclosure on his property, a sanctuary that allowed Storm to roam freely while remaining safe from outside threats. The enclosure bridged the forest and Jack's cabin, giving Storm access to both worlds. The community chipped in to help, planting native trees and vegetation to create a natural habitat. Storm quickly became a symbol of unity for the town. He continued to assist in search and rescue missions, his reputation growing as a protector of both humans and the forest. Children told stories about the magical creature who had saved people in the mountains, and hikers left small offerings of berries and trinkets near the trailheads as a sign of gratitude and respect. For Jack, life settled into a new rhythm. The loneliness that had once haunted him faded as he found purpose in his bond with Storm and his role in protecting their shared home. He often reflected on how much his life had changed since that stormy night when he first found Storm shivering in the rain. "You were more than a rescue," Jack whispered one evening as they watched the sunset together. "You saved me too." Storm nuzzled his hand in quiet acknowledgement. The two of them sat in peaceful silence, the golden light of dusk casting long shadows across the forest floor. Their journey had been long and difficult, but they had found a way to bridge the gap between human and nature, proving that even in a world of fear and division, extraordinary connections could thrive. Together, they would continue to face whatever storms lay ahead, side by side.